So we're here today to talk about the Kohberger case. That's the 4 Idaho students that were murdered in November of 2022. What I have here is what we call the Affidavit of Probable Cause, or PC Affidavit. It's the document that starts a case. It's the document that the first thing that we read as criminal defense lawyers. It gives us the high point of the investigation. What's the purpose of this thing? Obviously, you can't just get arrested. There has to be the Constitution, which is the document that governs everything we do, says that nobody can be arrested except on oath or affirmation supported by probable cause. What's probable cause? Probable cause is facts and circumstances that would lead a reasonably prudent person to believe that you committed a crime. So that's what this is. This is a statement under oath or affirmation that tells a judge, hey, judge, this is why we think there's a reason to believe that Kohberger committed this crime. That's what this is. So once this is turned in, then the judge reviews it and says, okay, if everything in here is true, then yes, I agree. There's a reason to think somebody committed a crime and a warrant is issued. So what are the high points of this thing? It tells us basically what happened. And it's written by the lead detective or the detective of the case. Anyone who's a police officer can write it. But in this case, statement of Brett Payne, he's the lead detective in this case, I'm assuming. So what he talks about, of course, he wasn't there when anything happened. He shows up at the house. And this whole case, again, is something we call circumstantial. You hear people say circumstantial evidence as if it's bad evidence. Of course, the best evidence would be if we had somebody who watched the guy kill him, watched him stab him right there, and then got away and said, hey, I've known this guy for 20 years. He's the one that did it. I saw him. Or if it was on video, but that never happens. What we have are links, circumstances, facts that sort of tie somebody to the crime scene. That's what this is. So the lead detective shows up. He's probably at home, probably working when this happens. 911 call comes out, patrol officers show up, they look, they walk inside. Oh no, a murder happened. What do we do? So they tape it all off. You've seen crime scene tape. They get everyone out of there, and then they call the detectives. That's what this is. Detective shows up. It's afternoon after it happened. And he's being walked through the house, which was the crime scene, by the patrol officers who showed up first. 3-story house. First floor, second floor, third floor. Bodies on the third floor, bodies on the second floor. First thing they do is describe the house. Of course, better to have a picture. Somewhere, I'm sure there's a picture. He tries to describe it here. In summary, walks in, goes upstairs, tells us there's 2 bodies in one bedroom on the second floor, and then there's 2 bodies in a bed on the third floor, and then tells us who they are. Nobody saw the killer. Nobody saw this happen. So that's pretty much all they have to go with. But they can look around and see if there are any clues. One clue is that there were knife wounds. They can tell. They can tell that the people were stabbed. They weren't shot. They weren't beaten to death. They weren't given pills, they were stabbed. So that's a clue. Another clue that they find is a knife sheath on the third floor in the bed next to one of the victims. The sheath is the case that the knife goes in. So knife this big, called the K-bar, hating on the Marine Corps. I know we all hate that. It has a sheath, has a case that it goes into. And that sheath snaps shut so that when you're walking around with this knife, it doesn't fall out. So they find this sheath. Turns out the button, the snap, has DNA on it. DNA is kind of like when you touch something, cells from your body fall off. All of these cells have DNA in them. So they use the DNA to try to match who you are if they have a sample of yours. That's really all they have. So what do? Well, the first logical thing they do is they start figuring out, did anybody see anything? I'm sure they spent hours talking to the neighbors. Hey, did you hear anything funny last night? Did you see anything funny last night? What were you doing last night? They just go out and start knocking on doors. Well, in this day and age, when everybody has a video camera, while they're doing that, they're also asking you, do you have a video camera? Do you have a ring cam, a doorbell cam, videoing things? Do you have security cameras? If you're a business, do you have security cameras? And if you do, can we get them? So the first thing they do is they get all of that camera footage. Nobody really has seen much, but they get a bunch of video footage. Apparently there's a ton of it, and they start watching it. And you can just imagine businesses, houses, everything that can possibly take, ATM machines even have cameras, everything that can possibly take a video, they have patrol officers watching it. And they're looking for anything. Who was there? Who's driving around about that time? They watch these videos, and of course, I'm sure they see thousands of cars. Well, I don't know about thousands, but certainly a lot of cars driving around, more than one. But when you read the PC affidavit, it only talks about one car. Why is that? Because they've narrowed it down. They know who they think it is. But I'm sure if you watch these videos, you'd see more than one car driving around. So they come upon a white car. They can see in the video a white car. They see it in a couple of different videos. This store, for example, it drives by this house, and they link it, and they keep seeing it. They're interested in this white car. Whose car is this? What is it? Well, they have people at the FBI who, believe it or not, can eyeball a car in a video and tell you that is just like Mona Lisa on My Cousin Vinny. They can tell you not that it's a Pontiac Tempest, but that whatever kind of car they think it is. And they do that here. They tell us that they think it's a 2011 to a 2016 Hyundai or something like that eventually. So the police take that information and they start asking around. This happened in Idaho at the University of Idaho, at the town where the University of Idaho is, called Moscow, Idaho. Well, close by is Washington State University. So there's two universities probably within 10 miles of each other apparently. So they start looking. Let's search. See who has a white car. And you can just imagine the manpower. They're searching registrations, they're looking, but police keep very detailed records. Every time somebody gets stopped, they record, even if that doesn't turn into anything, they record who the person was, what kind of car they were driving, what the license plate was. All that information is available. And when you register your car at the university, anytime you get a parking ticket, all of that yields information as to these cars. So they take all this information and they're trying to find this type of car. So eventually they come up with some clues. They come up with this car being registered, a car like this being registered at Washington State University to Kohberger. But they can see in the video another clue that the car doesn't have a front license plate, which is weird because both Idaho and Washington, which are the two states, this is on the Idaho-Washington border, require a front license plate and a rear license plate. So if you don't have a front license plate, it's kind of strange because you're not in Idaho, probably an Idaho registration or a Washington registration. So anyway, they find out that it's Kohberger's. And they find out that Kohberger has this car registered at Washington State University, and he uses a Pennsylvania tag. And in Pennsylvania, they only require a rear license plate. They don't require a front license plate. So that's important. So then what do? They look up Kohberger's address. What's the address registered to this car? And they go to that address and they find the car. Well, sure enough, there's a white Hyundai parked in the parking lot at Kohberger's house. But at this point, it has a Washington tag. Doesn't have a Pennsylvania tag. But it only has one. It doesn't have two. So they look it up and they do some more investigating and they find out that he recently registered his car from Pennsylvania to Washington. And probably he brought the car from Pennsylvania because if you buy a car in a state that doesn't require a front plate and a rear plate, a lot of times you don't have a mounting bracket in the front, so you don't put it on anyway. You'd have to go buy one and people are lazy. So probably why, they probably issued him two license plates, but he only had screws for the rear license plate, so he didn't put it on the front license plate, just it had a rear license plate. But anyway, so now, at this point, what do they know? They know that Kohberger has a car that's similar to a car that was seen driving around the scene at approximately these times during some 24-hour period around the times of the killings. So now what? They want to keep looking into that. Of course, they're exploring all kinds of leads beside that. Well, again, they do a review, and every time somebody gets pulled over, again, they generate records for the police. And they find out that Kohberger was pulled over in Idaho like a month or two before that. So what do? They go pull the body cameras. Police officers who stop people wear body cameras. And on the body camera, they watch the whole interaction of that stop. And during that stop, the police officer asks Kohberger for his phone number and Kohberger gives it to him. So now they have Kohberger being stopped in a white car with Pennsylvania license plates, of course, but they have his phone number. So that's the next thing they do. They're investigating the phone. They take the phone number and they go to the phone company. Of course, they don't have the phone and they don't have Kohberger. He's long gone. They don't know where he's at. But they have the phone service provider, which is AT&T. And they go to AT&T and they ask them for records, lots of records. First record is, give me all the calls from such and such time to such and such time. What are they looking for? They know who the victims are. They know what the victims' phone numbers are. So they're wondering, was there ever any call between Kohberger and the victims? And apparently, there's no more said about that. So the answer to that is no, which will raise an interesting question that we'll get into later. But the other thing they ask for from the phone company is location data. Each cell phone uses cell towers. You've all heard of roaming. We used to get charged for roaming back in the Stone Ages. When you're driving around, your phone is using towers. That's how it gets reception. It finds a tower, it hooks to that tower, and that gives you clear reception. When you're way out in God's country and there are no towers, your phone doesn't work very well because you're a long ways from the tower. Well, your phone reports to the tower, so they always know where you're at. So how do they know? So your phone is trying to get connected to all kinds of towers. Maybe at one particular minute, it's connected to 2 towers or 3 towers. So they use those towers that it's connected to develop sort of a circle as to where that phone is. So imagine that. They get all the data from that telephone from not only this day, but a whole time since this account's been open, which I think was from June. So from June to December, worth of data on where this phone has been, and they start looking at it. Well, of course, the first thing they're doing is focusing on the night of the killings. And there is no evidence from that evidence or that information that he was near the house. Why? You can shut off your phone on airplane mode. You can shut it off totally. You can not bring it, or maybe he didn't do it. Those are all the reasons why that could be that he wasn't around there. But there's nothing putting him there. Obviously, if they did have him on a tower at the house, that would be tremendous evidence. They don't. But the other thing they do is just look, and they see that that phone sort of tracks a route from Washington, where Kohberger lived, to Idaho that night and then back. They can tell that that phone went from Washington over to Idaho and back, which is evidence, obviously, at about the same times. But, of course, during the time in question, the phone doesn't report at all, anywhere. Well, then the next thing they have to do is they have to match. How do we know for sure that that phone is Kohberger's? Because you could say, hey, somebody else had my telephone. I didn't have the phone. I don't know what they were doing. I wasn't with them. How do they match it? So what they do is they look at all the places that phone's been. Look for a restaurant, for example, or a grocery store, or something that had cameras. So they decide, okay, that phone was at a grocery store on this day at this hour. And they look for video from the store. And they can watch the video and see if the person was there. And they do that 3 or 4 times, and they determine, yes, he's always with his phone, because they can tell by watching the video, so they connect it. So that's another piece of evidence they have. Then, once they've got all this, they're like, okay, where's this guy at? Well, they find out that he's originally from Pennsylvania. So at the time of the murders happened November 13th. They're analyzing the phone data on December 22nd, December 23rd timeframe. This thing was written on December 30th, and Kohberger was arrested shortly thereafter. That's how fast this investigation moved. But by the time they analyze the phone data, he's not around. They can't go talk to him, but they know he's in Pennsylvania. So what do? They go to his house and they get his trash, because they did find a sheath at the scene, which I talked about, the knife sheath. And they can tell that the knife sheath has DNA on it. So they have somebody's DNA, but they have nothing to compare it to. Whose DNA is it? So they go get the trash from the Kohberger house in Pennsylvania, which of course everybody touches the trash. Family, mother, mom, dad, brother, sister, Kohberger himself, everybody touches the trash. Amazingly, they pick this trash up one day, ship it to Idaho, and analyze it by the following day. And by the following day, they have a match between trash from the residence in Pennsylvania, and a button on the knife sheath found at the murder scene. So with all that, hey Judge, this is what we think. These 4 kids were stabbed. There was a sheath, which goes with the knife, which stabs people, found at the scene of the crime. The sheath has DNA on it. The DNA matches Kohberger's DNA from Pennsylvania. Kohberger's car was driving around in the area approximately at the times of the scene, at the times of the homicide. The phone shows that he left Washington, went over to Idaho, and then came back to Washington at a time that would be consistent with somebody who did this. And of course, it's not really huge evidence, but he's a criminology major, PhD major, and he's had some interesting surveys out on the internet. With all of this, Judge, we think there's reason to believe that Kohberger did it. What do you think? Judge reads it. Affidavit is 18 pages long. Signs it right here. Arrest warrant. Case begins. They pick him up in Pennsylvania. He's coming back. Now it's time to plan the defense.